Welcome to the Silicon Valley Fourth Interest Group presentation of the 1984 FIG tour of China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. Let's meet our 18 participants. On the back row from the left, we see Chuck Moore and Min Moore, Mike Perry, myself, Bill Ragsdale, Mrs. Will Baden, Mr. Will Baden, and Marlon Overson, the editor of Fourth Dimensions. In the middle row left is Robert LeQuay, his son, then Marguerite Phillips, who was our tour guide, Eric Moore, Chuck and Min's son, and I have to apologize for not remembering the name of the gentleman with the black beard, then Alan Furman. Front row left is George Stevens, Kim Harris, the daughter of the LeQuays, Henry Laxon, Bob Reiling, and our two local tour guides. Not pictured is Dr. Ting. Here's an overview of our itinerary. We started in San Francisco, which is at the center right. Follow the red arrow down to Japan, where we changed planes, and then on to Taiwan, which was our first major stop. Then Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Hangzhou, north to Beijing, and then west to Xi'an, and finally back to San Francisco. The tour lasted from September 25th to October 15th of 1984, a total of about 20 days. I'm not going to present this in the form of chronological order or locations. Instead, it's a series of themes which cover our experiences. First will be our travel, the work in Taiwan and the formal conference portion, the people, food, entertainment, the touring sites we visited, our time in Xi'an, visiting the Terracotta Warriors, some of the oddities we saw along the way, the Imperial Palace in Beijing, the Ming Tombs outside of Beijing, and finally ending at the Great Wall. We traveled by multiple modes of transportation form. Here, the first by airplane was Pan Am from San Francisco, and we see now on plane Eric Moore, Min Moore, and Chuck Moore, and again the gentleman I can't remember the name of in the back. In Hong Kong, at the sea terminal, we boarded a jet boat, and we took the jet boat to Guangzhou. Then we got off the jet boat at Guangzhou, and after a day, we took an airplane CAC to Shanghai. Finally, we had a tour bus at every stop along the way. It was very comfortable. I believe it was a Chinese manufactured bus. Every town we would have a local tour guide. The bus would hold about 30 people, so we were very comfortable. And in this, we learned all about the Tetra Pak orange drink, the common beverage which did not require refrigeration, were the little juice boxes, foil-lined with a straw attached. Here's our arrival in Taipei, Taiwan. The local Fourth Interest Group was extremely hospitable, met us at the airport, raised our spirits after many hours of travel on the road. They presented us with flags, one for formal and one for the Fourth Interest Group, which we carried with us through the rest of the event. Our major purpose for this whole tour was a series of formal conferences. The major one was in Taipei, and then we did presentations in Shanghai and also in Beijing. The conference was very well organized over 2 days with presentations in English and in Chinese. Dr. Ting, an associate, translated from English to Chinese and Chinese to English. Will Baden was a hero and drew a crowd whenever he did a presentation. Also, he presented in Chinese, which he learned just for this trip. He would start by giving a greeting, catch the people's attention. He would introduce himself and got more attention, and then when he began the first paragraph of his presentation, the students would break into applause. Likewise, Mike Perry drew a crowd whenever he did presentation. In Shanghai, astronomers came from the Purple Mountain Observatory to attend. They met Chuck and reported on their use of the Varian 620i computer. In Taiwan, we had presentations by both the local FIG members and our group. In the other cities, it was a one-way presentation where we just discussed forth. In 1949, the Chinese Revolution drove the Nationalist Party into exile in Taiwan. Here is the tomb of their leader, Chiang Kai-shek. It has, appears very close to be like the Lincoln Memorial. It's very tall, all done in beautiful marble, And then here is the statue of Chiang Kai-shek, much more than life-size. In a white shirt at the base, you see Chuck Moore gazing upward. This is the logo of the Jiaotong University. They had a branch in Taiwan, a branch in Shanghai, and it's sort of the MIT or Caltech of China. The presentations there were very well attended. We had local translators. We learned how to pace ourselves to make that come across effectively. We had wonderful luncheons at the faculty clubs at each of these spots. Again, they took good care of us. This is a meeting in Shanghai, and notice the clothes. In Taipei, the young folk students with white shirts and slacks, more in a Western style, and in China, it was still Mao jackets, very, very uniform across all the people. Here's Kim Harris in Shanghai doing a presentation. The small banners were also present from Taipei, and we carried them with us wherever we spoke, and they could decorate the podium. Again, Will Baden was our star of the event because he spoke Chinese, and he's very interesting. Now we begin more of our touring. We see our group here in the museum area. Our two local guides were at the bottom right. They were required and essential, as there were no signs in English, and they knew all the restaurants. Plus, they knew the locations of Western-style toilets along the way. Well, we see some of our people. Here is Will Baden having a moment of repose in a garden. This is Chuck Moore reading the local newspaper. Well, I would say this is a newspaper for 1423. It's all carved on stone. Kim Harris. We knew Kim Harris was interested in pot, and he proved it on the trip. And myself, Bill Ragsdale, by a decorated wall near the the Imperial Palace in Beijing. Food. Food was a high point on this excursion. We had 3 meals a day, wonderful, all in a Chinese mode. Not a hamburger in sight in 1984. Some of the food was a mystery, but it was all very, very good. There's Bob Reiling seated at the back, and I found out he didn't like rice, so I always sat next to him, and that way I always got a double serving. In this photo, we're in Hong Kong having Peking duck. Again, more food shots. Typically on a Lazy Susan, what we learned was that a 12-course meal had 12 different plates brought out with a serving for each person. So you would serve yourself, rotate the plates around, but as courtesy was to always leave a morsel on the plate. If you ate the last morsel on the plate, that was an indication to the host that you were still wanted some more, and they would replace the dish with a full one. And here's our group again, another nice dinner. Again, many of them were at faculty clubs because I think the professors at the faculty club found it was a nice excuse because their food style improved when they had Western visitors. And again, Chuck in the way in the back with the cowboy hat on. Entertainment. We took a day cruise on the Huangpu River through Shanghai. This river was dug by human labor in about the year 200 and has been expanded ever since. Here we see a juggler animation. In Xi'an, we attended the Chinese opera. There are some 360 existing stories which are based on historic folktales. Some of them date from some of them are in dialects which the government discourages. We see a couple of the solo artists, and here's the curtain call at the very end. Now, one of my favorites, the Beijing Circus. It was rather like Cirque du Soleil today, not quite as glamorous, but every bit as skillful. There was mostly human performers. We'd see jugglers, dancers, magicians. Here are ladies doing plate spinning. And it ended with an animal act. So Siegfried and Roy, here's how it's done in China. This is the Beijing Ancient Observatory. It was started in 1422 and had major updates in 1644 with missionary assistance. The earliest such instruments here dated from 1217. This, I believe, is a star map, again posted on a very elevated observatory building. Here we're at the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. It was constructed in 1406, from then to 1420, about the same time as the Imperial Palace was made. It was renovated in the 1700s, and of course they take very good care of it ever since. The Ming and Qin empress would meet here for praise for a good harvest. Along the way, we visited many workshops. Here we see weavers making rugs. Several in our party actually bought elaborate rugs which are shipped to the United States, and we got about 5 or 6 months later. Here's a lady making editing corrections in weaving. She went through with tiny tweezers, pulling out any of the fibers that were in the wrong place. So if in a white area you had a black fiber, she would catch it and remove it. Here in Beijing, we see a small part of the Summer Palace. It was built in the Qing Embassy, in the Qing Dynasty. Over its 3 square miles, we see lakes, gardens, and many buildings. Longevity Hill is at the rear, and it was made from dirt that was excavated out of the lake that we see in the front. The work was started in 1271. The full extent was finished 500 years later in 1764. In 1755, the Qingling Empress added this boat. The wooden part, which was above water, was burned in 1860 and was replaced by marble. This is called the Boat of Purity and Ease. The money was taken from the Imperial Navy budget because, after all, this is a boat. The city of Xi'an was walled over the period of 1368 to 1398 and was rebuilt about every 200 years. Here we see one of the corner guard stations. A protective building was built over the terracotta warriors. You may have heard of them. We'll see them in great detail in just a moment. This is the mausoleum of the first Qin emperor. It was discovered by farmers digging a well in 1974, and we were there just 10 years later. Built in the year 200 BC, that is 2,200 years ago, it has 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, 520 horses, and many figures of ordinary people, plus thousands of arrows and weapons. It's estimated that it took 700,000 workers to build this, who formed a 40 square mile city, which is necessary for food, for residences, and for living for those people. It originally had wooden supports holding up a reed ceiling, and that was covered with clay. Over time, the roofs collapsed, and we were covered by 14 feet of soil over the course of the following 2,000 years. Here's a picture, close-up of what the warriors look like. They only excavated partial of them to give you some idea for the scope of what's there and what's yet to be revealed. On the right-hand side is Marlon Overson, and you see the figures are roughly life-size. They say that no 2 figures are identical. They were set up in assembly line fashion, one production line building arms and other heads and other bodies and other legs. And then as they were placed in the tomb area, they would mix and match all the body parts to make the figures. Here's one of our oddities. In Xi'an, the hotel was a maintenance disaster. Our floor's hot water heater overheated, filling the hall with steam. We found that the hotel was only 1 year old. They apologized, saying that after all it was built by the Russians. Here are roof details. So many of the roofs are tiled, and on the corners they put these figurines in, which I believe there are placed to ward off bad spirits. We see animals, we see gargoyles, we see dragons, and little monkeys everywhere. In Beijing, at the Beijing Zoo, we saw pandas right up close. This looks like it's a stuffed little toy panda, but believe me, it's about a 4.5 foot tall real life panda. Buddhas were carved into mountains wherever there was exposed rock faces. We saw saw quite a few, saw many. Here is bamboo scaffolding being used for construction. This is a building about 6 stories high, and all the way up, workmen were walking on and supported by bamboos held together by lacing cord. A bicycle parking lot. It has an attendant, which is right in the center. It costs 2 cents to park your bicycle. You get a little bamboo claim check, and there's a little matching check that's hung on your bicycle. In China, all license plates are binary. That makes a lot of sense to us as programmers. Well, not really. I just happened to catch this one, and it was interesting. I was honored that Don Knuth included my photo in one of his humorous papers. This sign marks a shopping district. The sign says store ahead, with being taken a photo of by Kim Harris. And here's the local Best Buy store. Remember, this is 1984, and the IBM PC was very fresh, only a year or two old. And here was one covered in plastic in the store. It was mainly for show because, as an import item from the United States, it was very expensive. It probably would have been $20,000 to $25,000. There's our group touring along, and our our host on the side, Marguerite Phillips, in the green skirt. And at Hangzhou, we visited what's called Westlake. This is immortalized in the willow pattern china. It's a honeymoon destination, very popular, and a number of famous people maintained villas there. It's memorialized, as I said, in the willow pattern design. And here we see my photographs at the bottom and 2 on the right with arrows to their corresponding picture in the plate. This is a view from Tiananmen Square facing north. The Great Hall of the People is on the right, and behind us to the left is the tomb of Mao Zedong. We're looking straight at the Forbidden City, also called the Imperial Palace. The Tiananmen Square holds roughly 800,000 people. The edges are numbered so that you could actually be assigned a number position in it by a grid X and Y. The tiles are about 1 meter square. This is an overview of the Forbidden City from the air. We entered at the bottom right through the major gate, which you'll see in a moment, and then you can see the rings of 4 different palaces with great courtyards in between. This is all called the Gugun in Chinese, which means the Great Within. It was the home of emperors for 500 years. It has 8,000 rooms, 980 buildings, and it covers 180 acres. It says, history says 1 million workers worked 14 years in its construction from 1406 to 1420. It receives approximately 19 million visitors a year. Anybody into China goes through Beijing and sees the Forbidden City. This is its entrance, which is called the Gate of Heavenly Peace. The center gate was only used by the emperor, so the ordinary people used the gates on the left and the right. This is the outer palace. This is the middle palace. And this is the inner palace, which was the residence of the emperor. Here's a joke. This reminds me of those who are old enough to remember Disneyland were issued tickets A through E for the attractions. The A tickets were the most common, and the E tickets were the most precious. So we saw a side door here that did have an A ticket requirement on it. The turtle in the Imperial Palace serves as a national museum, so artifacts are scattered around everywhere. This is a litter called a cow, or a palanquin in French, which is used to transport important people. I think this one was probably not for the emperor because it would have been more ornate and it probably would have been enclosed with a small cab. Here's the Imperial Throne. I assume it's gold. We did not get that close. Now, leaving the Imperial Palace, 30 miles away from Beijing, we're on the way to the Great Wall, and there is the 13 Ming Tombs. These were built from 1380 to 1644. 3 of the tombs have been excavated as museums. They were not proud of the excavation work that was done. Damage was done to the artifacts. A lot of the cloth items disintegrated upon being touched, so only 3 of them have been excavated so far. This is the interior, organized and refurbished. Porcelain work on the top left, and then what I believe are cabinets holding furniture, clothes, and household goods. These were found in a similar condition to the King Tut tombs in Egypt. They were a mismatch. The material was basically just stacked in. There was no presentation. The idea was they needed X amount of material to accompany the emperor on his celestial voyage, and so they just put it in the tomb and closed the door. Outside the Ming Tombs, there's a 4-mile strip called Spirit Way, which has life-size carved animals, and here I stand with a carved elephant. And now we're approaching the end of our trip. On the connect on the ridge lines, we see the Great Wall. The Great Wall was begun in year 600 BC, and it was completed roughly the period of 1368 to 1644. It's close to 5,500 miles long, but if you count all the tributaries, the rivers, the mountain ranges that form a part of it, it actually covers 13,000 miles. It's more than a wall. It also contains barracks for soldiers. It does signaling. It is a repository for food and stores. And very importantly, it serves as a pathway. You can see the ground is so rough that you really need the service of the wall to provide a roadway or a superhighway from point to point. So a little closer up, again, how it follows the ridge line. And this is the main gate that the tourists use. Some of you may remember that David Copperfield staged a walk through the Great Wall in 1986. It was a TV special filmed here. With platforms on either side, a single camera on a boom showed his disappearance on one side, rotated up and over, and showed his appearance on the far side. Our group, we spent about a half a day at the Great Wall. There were museum components built in, and it was exciting and exhilarating to walk the major parts of it. Here's another view. You notice that the stonework here is not quite as well kept up. The further you got from the main gate, the rougher the stonework got. And finally, about a half a mile or a mile away, you would see what was the original construction, which was much less finished, much less polished. This is a final group photo that we took as we said goodbye to Beijing, the Great Wall, and to China. The people here are starting from the left is Min Moore, then George Furman, Eric Moore, Henry Laxon, Chuck Moore, Marlon Overson, me, and Mike Perry. So our final goodbye, this was the group from the Silicon Valley area that toured the China in 1984. I would like to thank you. I hope this was a very interesting presentation for you. We'll end with references. You can read the details, mostly of the conference portion, from Volume 6, Number 5, January, February of Fourth Dimensions, 1985, and the March, April of 1985. Thank you, and it was a pleasure to do the presentation.